Yes, good day, board members and staff and guests, and welcome to this December 11th board work session. To start off with, I would like to introduce Janice Hernandez, who is going to lead us in our invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance today.
Please rise. Heavenly Father, we ask for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace as we make the decisions that may affect the students, staff, faculty, and parents of Southwest ISD, and continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth for the greater glory of you and for the service of humanity. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Yes, sir. I'll go ahead and introduce a little bit in terms of Delila. We've had a long-standing partnership with our friends Brooke and Casey. They provide some really high-level data and some data that allows us to kind of frame the work. We point out areas that we think are strengths, areas that are growing, areas of deficiency that allow us to kind of talk as leadership to kind of change what we're doing or create priorities into some other areas. But these two ladies, Alicia and Dee, have been friends and family of Southwest ISD, and back in the day we created a market group of ISD that we wanted to compare with throughout the state of Texas. And so they bring that data back to us, and we wanted to bring them here and give that information to our board. You will see some areas of strength, you'll see some areas growing, you'll see some deficient areas in our district. And we don't like to sugarcoat it. We like to put all the data out there, be transparent, and explain to our governors how we're working towards changing some of that data to be very good data moving forward. I don't know if Delila wants to add anything before we bring them up.
So we do appreciate Dee and Alicia Thomas and some of the work we've been able to carry out through our principal meetings. So our principals, as we have accountability system, we continue to learn of. We are still bringing it back to every principal and making sure that they're also understanding it, and in order for us to be able to drive our goals and the initiatives on the campus.
I think one other point that's unique to this year is that we do have a delay in the CAPE report, which is aggregate data coming from the state specific to our district and campus. And so the information you're getting today is with information that is most current, but will change during a few weeks as the official table comes out and we get some official results in certain categories of data. And so as Dee or Alicia, if you guys would like to take over at this point, to come on up to the podium, it's yours.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Frazier, members of the board, and Dr. Verstuff. Thank you so much for inviting us to be here with you today. We're going to talk about today, but we're going to anchor it in what we know from yesterday, what happened in the past, and then looking forward to what's coming up in the future with the 86th legislative session. We're going to share with you a little bit about the upcoming legislative calendar, a little bit about the School Finance Commission, what their recommendations, which they're working on today, and what that looked like, and then we're going to discuss the A through F ratings. You know, when we look at the state, there are many lenses, and it depends on your lens as to how you feel, what are the key initiatives, what are the most important things right now. Before the election, Education was a high priority for the governor, for the lieutenant governor, for a number of the people running for election. They had a tremendous interest in educators' viewpoints. We hope that that continues in the 86th legislative session. So let's talk about in the 85th, there were a lot of bills that were filed, 6,600. About 1,100 of those bills passed. There were about 274 bills that related to school accountability and assessment, and of those, 44 passed. So you're going to see a lot of energy go into filing bills, but you'll find there'll be very few that actually are passed at the end of the time. We're about 29 days away from the start of the 86th legislative session, and there was tremendous interest in that last election. The Secretary of State's office said that we had the highest midterm voter participation since 1970. So there's a lot of interest in the state that should continue through this 86th session. There's some categories. There have been a lot of bills filed. November 12th, the 1 week after the election, was the pre-filing of bills. And after Thanksgiving, these are the numbers that we saw in these categories. Administration in terms of education. Administration and governance, that was a broad category, and the largest number of bills, 31 bills were, and there are more now, but right after Thanksgiving, we had already 31 bills, 7 bills in accountability and assessment, 12, Dalila, in curriculum and instruction, a number in discipline and safety, 8 bills, 4 were related to weapons. Uh-oh, I don't want to sign into Chrome. We'll get that adjusted. 4 were related to weapons, and there was another around cardiovascular screenings for high school athletes, that kind of thing. School finance, that will be a big focus of this legislative session. Property tax reduction, that's a focus of the governor. About 20 bills have already been filed there. Retirement and benefits, no one here is interested in that yet, I'm sure. But 8 bills have been filed. And then a lot, Dalila, again, in technology textbooks and the instructional materials allotment. This is a slide that was put out by the agency and got to hear a presentation by the commissioner back in September. Possible areas of interest, school finance. Just stick here with me, stay with me. Just do that, all right. And then some strategic funding, maybe reorganizing the school finance system around strategically funding some key areas like teacher quality, around the school year, the length of the school year, around pre-K through 3, and post-secondary readiness, college access. Jesse, you're going to finish this? There's already been a legislative appropriations request from the agency around safety, safe and healthy schools, and around special education. The commissioner talked about the percentages of young people identified with disabilities is rising across the state. We don't know what that percentage will be, but he committed to providing updated numbers to the legislature as we move forward. Other items of interest, of course, we've been vouchers, private school choice, we expect, individual graduation committees, the IGCs. We've already had a bill filed, Senate Bill 213, filed by Senator Seliger from Amarillo around maintaining the IGCs. We expect to see some tweaks to the accountability system. Dee Carney is going to share with you some data about the accountability system for 2018. We're expecting some tweaks, but probably no major overhaul. And then there'll be information about that. What if the A through F system had been assigned to campuses? That report is due out by January 1. Okay, about the Commission on Public School Finance. The last Supreme Court a decision on school finance, the justices wrote, the system needs transformational, top-to-bottom reform that amounts to more than a Band-Aid on top of a Band-Aid, right? We'll see what happens. The governor's response was to appoint the School Finance Commission, and they are meeting today to work on their final recommendations. Linking the work of school finance to some great literature, we might call this Great Expectations, right? The last School Finance Commission did not give us any meaningful recommendations, but there have been a lot of discussion. This commission has been working for about a year. They're divided themselves into 3 working groups. One, the outcomes working groups. They've come out with some very interesting recommendations around some district incentives. They published their recommendations in July. Following that, around September, October, the expenditures working group reported and said, okay, if we followed the outcomes recommendations, this is how money would be expended. What group did not start working until after the election? That would be the revenue working group. Because it's always, there are a lot of ways to spend the money, but the devil's in the details, right? How are we going to do that? How are we going to make that work? They started working right after the election. They came out last week with their recommendations, and now they're working. Today they started meeting at 10 a.m. to put it all together. Outcomes working group recommendations. See here we have Treasure Island or 1984. Contrast. They said let's incentivize around school district performance around 3rd grade reading, around 8th grade algebra achievement, around moving kids into post-secondary readiness, what they call the CCMRs, college, career, and military readiness, and then look at some optional funding with weights for teacher pay, which might be linked to teacher performance. That's some of the conversation now. Other issues, adjusting comp ed beyond free and reduced lunch, understanding that there are differences with young people, right, that come from a family that qualifies for reduced lunch and a family that qualifies for free lunch, that there can be significant differences in those families, particularly for young people whose family has qualified for free lunch more than 3 years in a row. And the understanding that not all poverty is the same. The governor has a particular interest in funding full-day pre-K, and we know that that would be of benefit. There are all kinds of issues associated with that, like facilities. Do we have the classrooms for them? But that will be a big discussion. Focus on English language learners with some incentivizing. The Outcomes Working Group is recommending around dual language. And then the CTE weights, realigning those to promote programs with promising job fields. They suggested eliminating the 5 EOCs. We don't know what they'd recommend replacing that with. We'll see. Much to come. So, the governor's plan is let's get a solution to Robin Hood, right? And also a focus on capping property taxes, ending recapture or limiting recapture. We don't yet have a workable solution. It will be a big discussion. How are we going to do that, right? And as I mentioned earlier, you'll hear a lot of discussion probably around differentiated teacher compensation. One of the plans that there's a lot of conversation about is the Dallas ISD plan. It's called ACE, which stands for Accelerating Campus Excellence, where they have differentiated teacher pay based on student performance. They've used additional funding. They had some grant funding, very difficult to maintain without increased school financial funding. So we'll see. The commissioner also has an interest in this in his own proposal. Again, an interest in early childhood and targeted student incomes. student achievement. House Joint Resolution 24 would require the Texas Constitution, would require the state to pay at least 50% of public school finance. Right now, you know that the state share has been decreasing for a number of years. That would require an infusion of funds. Right now, undergirding all of our public school system, it's all based off the Texas Constitution, 1876, and what's written in there is that the state is required to provide a general diffusion of knowledge. Well, that's an all-encompassing term. It's not real specific. More specifically lately is this charge that has come from the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board. That's who initiated it. But the governor has endorsed this, and our commissioner of TEA has also endorsed it. So what does this mean? 60 by 30 Texas. You will hear more and more about this during this legislative session, and more legislation will be aligned to it. That's our prediction, as is our current accountability system. What does this mean, 60 by 30 Texas? It means by 2030, 60% of all young Texans ages 25 to 34 will be able to enter the workforce with a 2 or 4 year degree or with a license or certification that will allow them to enter the job market with marketable skills, or be able to enter the military with a minimum of student debt. That's an overall arching goal for our pre-K through 12 plus educational system. So expect to hear more about that as we go through the 86th session and to connect it.
You said 25?
Ages 25 to 34. So by 2030. However, we're not at 2030, right? But the accountability system that Dee Carney is about to share with you in the data, a lot of it is already structured around 60 by 30 Texas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dee Carney. And Dee, you're going to push this little button when Google comes up. You're going to push right there.
To
Just
do
that
what?
left button when Google comes up.
When Google comes up. Okay, got it.
That's a plan.
Got it. I can handle the accountability system. I'm not sure I can handle Google. There we go. There we go. Good afternoon, Mr. Frazier, board members. Thank you, Dr. Versuff, and thank you for always inviting us back to share some information with you. So just to connect to this slide, 60 by 30, one of the pieces we looked at this morning with the leadership team is how many students from Southwest ISD directly enroll into a 2 or 4 year institution of higher education. Where are you right now, right? Where are you? And we can do that because that data is available from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. The most recent data is class of 2017, and what they found, kids graduate from high school, and then they can find them immediately enrolled in a 2 or a 4 year institution, 40%. Class of 2017, 40% of the Southwest ISD students immediately enrolled in a 2 or 4 year institution of higher ed in Texas. So this says 60 by 30. We're seeing consistent trends for the past 3 years, 40% of the students. Oh, that's not the right button. How about that one? There we go. Let's go back in time for a little bit. We'll put the Southwest data in context with the state data. So August 15th, ratings came out. Where are we now? It's almost time for the agency to release their what if report. House Bill 22 required TEA to produce a what if report, meaning they will show you, again, sliced a little bit differently this time, what those A through F ratings look like for campuses by different student groups. So we're watching for that. But until that comes out, here's where we are now. In 2017, remember, we had a different accountability system. It was either met standard or improvement required. This is all the districts in the state, Everything green, all those districts met standard. A few little gray dots there where improvement required. And this is what it looks like in 2018, with every district having a letter grade rating. The black dots, the black shading, are those Hurricane Harvey affected districts that are not rated. Okay? They did receive a numeric value, but officially in the system they're not rated. For districts, that's what it looks like on the bell curve. And then in 2017, for campuses, about 90% of the campuses met standard. In 2018, you can see it looks a little bit different, with 19% of the campuses earning an A or receiving a numeric value of an A, up to 36% for B, 30% Cs, 10% Ds, and 5% Fs. When the ratings came out, you had two perspectives. You had TEA's perspective, which you'll see here, and then you'll have the Moat Casey perspective in an article we produced the day after the results came out. The grade calculations are complex, and as we talked with your principals back in September, we reminded them in the student achievement domain, elementary schools are 100%, remember you have 3 domains. In the student achievement domain, the elementary schools it's all 100% based on STAR, and it's based on STAR at those 3 different proficiency levels, approaches, meets, and master's grade level. Middle school, also 100% STAR. High schools and districts, you've got 40% STAR, 40% CCMRs that you heard Alicia talk about, and then 20% for your graduation rates. So when we look at just the data we shared this morning, just looking at STAR, because as Dr. Versuff mentioned, TAPR data is not out yet, but there are some highlights that we wanted to share with you. And then when we have updated the full analysis, you will be provided a copy, is my understanding. So highlights, we looked for the student achievement domain, which is looking at STAR and their performance, grades 3 through 5, reading, writing, science, and math. When compared to the 5 comparison groups, and we've used these groups for a long time, about 5 years if I'm correct, right? Let me tell you the names of those groups since you don't have a report in front of you. These groups were selected based on similar size, similar economically disadvantaged enrollment, similar ELL populations, and similar SPED. We've used these 5 groups for the past 5 years. Clint ISD, Del Valle ISD, Eagle Pass ISD, Harlandale, and San Benito Consolidated ISD. So when I'm talking about STARs compared to these groups, it's these 5 groups. All right, that's what we're talking about. So 3 through 5, reading, writing, science, 3 through 7, math, above the group average for your peer district groups, if you will, at all 3 performance levels, and that's important. Approaches, meets, and master's level. Right? Now, there are some opportunities for improvement. That's our job, too, is to bring that forward to the leadership team. And there we see opportunities for improvement in the EOCs, in the high school EOCs, but also with growth. We had a long, I think, positive discussion about growth on reading and math and moving students. We can just see that when we look at those comparison districts and how Southwest compares to those other 5 districts. So that's the student achievement domain, statewide context, and local context. When you look at the school progress domain, there's 2 pieces to that. Part A is all about growth. That's the conversation we had this morning, because that's just based on STAR, reading and math, period. The second part to school progress is relative performance. That's where the agency looks at percent of economically disadvantaged students and compares campuses that way. That's based on STAR for 3 through 8, but high schools and districts are STAR and CCMRs. When you look at the percent of economically disadvantaged students enrolled in Southwest ISD, and these are last year's data, that's what's publicly available right now, you can see they range from 72% to 99%. The district average is 82%. And that's fine, but one piece we looked at was looking at were these high schools, were these middle schools, and we've had that conversation since this summer about making sure all our students who qualify for free or reduced price meals are actually turning in their forms, right? Again, not only because that's how we best serve students in the cafeteria, but now it's included in that, right, that second domain there about relative performance. The point counterpoint to Moat Casey and TEA. TEA in their analysis says that student poverty is not a strong factor. Our analysis shows the grades correspond with poverty, and so we made a slight adjustment to their press release. A 0.4 correlation is a moderate correlation to poverty, meaning that when you look at the campuses that earned an A, there's 1561 campuses that earned an A, those colored dots tell you percent of economically disadvantaged enrolled, and you can see where they're located, right? So blue dots, those campuses enroll 20% or less economically disadvantaged students, all the way to the red dots, which enroll up to 100% economically disadvantaged students. We do the same thing with the campuses that earned an F, or less than a 60 numerical score, 432 campuses. There are those locations, and you can see they tend to be high poverty, or campuses that serve large percentages of high poverty students. We also run it this way, so we can get a better look at it. These are scatter plots, if you will, but the dots all represent a campus. Blue dots enroll less than 20% economically disadvantaged, all the way to the red dots, which enroll 80 to 100% economically disadvantaged students. And you can see how many A's. Basically, if you're a blue dot, if you enroll less than 20% economically disadvantaged students, you're going to earn an A in this system. 76% of all blue dots received an A. Let's make that received. There are the numbers of dots because it's too hard to count. There's 725 blue dots. There's 2,500 red dots. So there are A's across each economic disadvantage band, but you can see that the blue dots, right, there's more likely a chance of earning or receiving an A if you're a blue dot. Yes, ma'am?
Do we have a list of the 11% red that received A?
We do. We actually do. The agency has produced that report, and I'm going to show you what we've learned about those campuses. Great question.
And are we a yellow, or what? We're 82%. So what color are we?
So your campuses. Yeah. So these are campus levels.
Okay.
So here are your campuses,
Okay.
right? Along with the Google sign-in. So these campuses here, again, you can see this is the percent economically disadvantaged. The yellow or the gold dots are 60 to 80%, and then red's 80 to 100. And then you can see how many are above the 90 line or at the 90 line for the A, B, C, D's, and then F's. But we also included it right there for you as well. All right, so you can kind of see, again, that same correlation or trend that you saw statewide here. All right? Now, if you have had an opportunity to see Commissioner Morath's presentation, and notice where it says TEA in the corner? Yes. This is a TEA slide. We don't, right? This is TEA slide. All right. Notice this is where they said it's moderate. Poverty is not a strong factor, and we corrected it to say moderate. But down in the corner, you see that blue box? It says there's 259 high poverty campuses that received a score of 90 to 100, right? And I've had an opportunity to hear Commissioner Morath on 3 or 4 different occasions, and each time he talks about these 259 campuses. Because it's true, we would all like to learn from the 259 campuses, right? So what we can see, when we look in the data file, we can tell you a little bit more about those campuses. First of all, this is total enrollment. We took all those dots and how many kids go to school there. And these dots range from a campus that has 100 kids or less than 100 kids to a campus that has almost 4,000 students, right? And so you can see that big cluster of red dots, right? And there's yellow and green underneath it. Most campuses enroll less than 1,000 kids in the state. That's one thing we've learned, right? We also learned, looking at enrollment, look at the blue dots. It doesn't matter if you have 100 kids or 4,000 kids. If you're a blue dot, and you're an A. So enrollment size, that's where that 0.4 correlation to poverty comes in, right? It's not really mattering whether how many kids you have. But when you look at these 259, and I'm going to call them outliers for now, and that's not a bad word, but that's just 11%, right? Because we have a whole lot of other high poverty campuses not there yet. We can see their names. All we can tell you in the data file is their name. And when we look at the names of those campuses, 79 of them appear to be selective enrollment campuses, meaning that it says early college, high school, STEM, magnet, some type of leadership academy. We know there's more, but they don't have it in their name. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah. So it's great when we have 259 examples, but it's not going to be your traditional neighborhood campus. Is that fair to say? Yeah. We can also see about half of those campuses enroll fewer than 500 students. There's a few that enroll 1,000 to 2,000. Those 9 campuses that enroll 1,000 to 2,000 are all specialty campuses. They're middle schools, early college, high schools that are selective enrollment.
Do you have an educated guess as to the actual percentage, not including the selective schools? So it's 11% that, what is the true percent if we don't include those schools?
If you take those out,
Yeah.
again, all we can truly do is take off 79. We know because of anecdotal evidence there's more, but all we can do is that. So it's still about
180.
That's from the APAC and EPAC to collect this
Yes.
data. I know in ASTED, it was Brandon, I thought it was Davila. We actually identified our district as what we enrollment choice or selective or so they're trying to do a better job of categorizing those campuses specifically to what he is talking about so that you can compare closer apples, maybe green and red apples or still apples.
Sure.
I think there's an effort to your point, to V's point, to try to do a better job of, we look at this information in aggregate form, that we can look at the different categories.
So is there a distinction right now, because we just became open enrollment, right? Well, we accept students from outside our boundaries. So that's not selective, obviously, that's very different from selective. So in this system, they're different, right? Or do they?
So the only experience that we have would be our CAS system, right? Is that's a selective enrollment school.
Right.
And that we think what's happening, like Dee is much better, is that the reason why the state is now collecting that, which Brandon brought to the table the other day, is because of this data. Is because districts are now saying, well, that's not really an accurate picture of how comprehensive schools compare. And so with anticipation, I could forecast is that they're probably going to have a different scheme to rate those schools.
We would hope.
So that they too compare against each other and not against comprehensive.
Yeah, we would hope that perhaps, but we don't know that. Right now, step one, the agency has to collect that from everybody and get that information in. I would love to see it in that what-if report. I would love, love, love for them to disaggregate the data that way, because they know we're going to. Right? So they can either beat us to the punch, or we're going to come along behind them and disaggregate it in our next article.
So there's 4 categories right now they're asking about. One selective, one choice. So CAS gives a choice, but it depends on the criteria. If we have over the number, it goes to a lot of systems. And so there's a lot of different variations to try to identify these. But I think in the end, that's going to get a better idea of comparing similar groups to similar groups.
Other questions about the poverty or before I move on to the third domain? All right, so the third domain is the closing the gaps domain. And we like to put that up there just so you get a clear picture of how many categories there are, how many student groups, and how many indicators. Because this is where TEA has been very intentional in aligning state and federal accountability. The closing the gaps domain, the agency also calls the ESSA domain, or the federal accountability domain. So there are federal student groups that are required, and each of those student groups have a target. Okay? When you count them all up, very large, very diverse middle schools and elementaries could have up to 71 different targets. High schools and districts, very large, very diverse, could have 54 different targets. It also explains why statewide so many campuses are under targeted improvement plans. We also found that the grades are impacted by mobility, not just poverty, but also mobility. And that comes from that Closing the Gaps report. This is state data, but we did look at district data in-house, and I'll provide you with that in a minute. Statewide, when you look at just STAR performance, the difference between continuously and non-continuously enrolled students is anywhere from 5 to 8 percentage points. That's kind of intuitive, right? What you do when you build your school system is kids who are with you and stay with you, and they have the benefits of the programs and all the things that you do to support kids. You would expect to see a little bit higher performance than your non-continuously enrolled kids who are coming to you with different experiences in different educational systems. What we weren't expecting to see statewide is the difference in the college, career, and military indicators. A 23 percentage point difference, that's huge. That's huge. So what this one particular indicator has done is really changing practice within all districts that we work with across the state, is making sure that and you guys speak to what you're doing locally, but statewide what we see is working with our PEAM staff to understand the importance of coding, and kids who, go ahead.
The next time that comes up, can you let Jody do something?
Oh, go ahead. If you got the magic, you fix it. And we'll keep talking about CCMRs here. And Dr. Verstuff, do you want to speak locally some of the enhancements or changes to the conversations that counselors have with PEAM staff for CCMR coding?
Sure. So we and Galu's done a really great job of trying to embrace the issue of CCMR, the college and which is a 40% of the criteria.
Why was Chrome open?
What we've been able to find out is
Okay.
that
I think I got it. I'm going to stick around and see.
really capturing that data in our district, but over the year we found out that everyone in Texas did a good job because it was data that was just out there and everyone knew the data, but we weren't putting it in the right places because it really wasn't looked at. So the things that kind of don't get monitored really don't get put in the right places. And now that the state is monitoring CCMR data, it is becoming really critical that not only in Southwest, every district in Texas has this kind of rejuvenated
Absolutely.
interest of where these data metrics need to be so that they get captured by the accountability system. Some things come from the higher education board, some things come from our PEAs, some things from military, those students who are signing up military will come from different systems. But as a system, we have to be extremely diligent in where we're putting our data. And we have been able to go back because we did a resubmission, a fall resubmission of last year's graduates. And I'm going to commend those people, Lisa and Galula, that we kind of went back, they created a task force, they talked about these data metrics, and we've been able to look at the data now, I think last week or the week before, and it's completely changed because we're actually capturing the data and putting it in the right spot. That's going to be a benefit, a huge benefit to our accountability system. It's not going to answer all the things that we work on because there are some other areas, but I think there is one area that we were doing these things. It's just like a lot of people, we weren't putting it in the right locations
That's perfect, perfect. And locally, when you look at Southwest ISD's closing the gap table for this particular metric, there's an 11 percentage point difference. So not nearly as exaggerated as the state difference, but still an 11 percentage point difference. Again, what we talked about this morning, an opportunity for improvement and just making sure that we're doing great things for kids. We just have to code them correctly on the back end for PEEMS. I'm going to skip through looking at our time here really quickly. So now that you know, what can you do? Coming into the legislative session, what can we do? Well, the first thing we did, we had an election. And by all accounts, educators voted. There seems to be a little more positive trend towards education and education-related issues. But as Alicia mentioned before, school finance is going to be the big topic this legislative session. We're hoping, we want to, as this Austin American-Statesman article closed with, fairer doesn't mean the new accountability rating system is fair yet. So tweaks need to be made. We certainly, at Moat Casey, will want to work with various legislators to get that done. But we would think you guys need to do your legislative priorities if you don't have some around accountability. There's some willingness to make some tweaks and changes there as well. And questions other than what we've already had?
Well, I think a point of pride that you mentioned was on the other CT pathways that we do have. Not all of them were getting that potential point in CCMR. But one of the things that Dee also mentioned earlier was that this is not a reason why we would want to stay away from the great work that we're doing at Southwest. Because some pathways that are in that CTE coherent sequence are not giving us that additional point in CCMR. So just because accountability is not giving us a point, that doesn't mean that later on, legislation or the accountability system will not change to where they will be adding some additional pathways. It was kind of like something that we learned also this morning.
And when we get beyond December 18th, when the paper report comes out, and bring it to you, we'll do that we're going to bring that back and really get to the week with the board so you guys can see this. One of the promising things that, is a surprise to me today is our elementary has done a really great job of becoming really effective teachers, effective learners, and you can see that reflected in the data compared to the other districts that we're comparing us to, that market group of districts. And how they color code that is you're either dark green or light green. If you're ahead of the pack, you're dark green, then light green, then goes yellow, then goes light red, and red. How stoplight works. So you can see that when we look at our third and our fourth and our fifth grade, that is probably light green, some areas dark green. I don't know if we want everything to be dark green. But you can also see that as we get into the middle schools, prior to this year, there was mostly light red and red and now red and yellow. And what looks promising is that you start to see some light green in the sixth grade and the seventh grade, probably in math, but even in some cases that you're seeing indicators that it's basically matriculating from the elementary to the middle. So the slide that we always talked about, middle school seems to be slowing down. We seem to be kind of maintaining our growth or even adding growth. And so we're not there, but looking just at the color coding system that they use today, it looks promising. It looks like we have potential. It looks like, we're flooding the hole, and now we can kind of start moving in the direction of getting more light green and green. So EOCs at the high school, we still have work to do. One of the areas of the accountability is academic, overall academic growth, which is a measure of reading and math through ninth grade, and the fact that we push rigor into our eighth grade and Algebra 1 earlier in the experience of our students, it may have a adverse effect on our accountability at the high school, because by not having the eighth grade and ninth grade math for the high school, we're not getting credit for the students, so only measuring English 1 and 2. And we could do better than this 1 and 2, that would help overall, but sometimes when you do what's best for kids, it may not be what's best for your accountability. So we had that conversation this morning. It is what it is. I can get better, we're going to get better and check those numbers. There's a lot of other information.
Would you say that we
Yes, sir, we put it all in the report, in the analysis with those 5 districts. So when we send you the final report, then I assume somehow they'll get you copies. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate the time. Thank you. But not as complicated as that Google Drive.
That's right. Thank you, Billy.
All right, the next thing on the agenda is catalog inclusion.
Yes, I think.
Sorry.
We want Francis or?
Yep, Francis.
Do you want to do the introduction since you've kind of been our lead person on this for 4 years? You ready to go? Francis worked for Brandon. I think you have a lot of, Francis.
I'm going for executive director of multiple, of all things. I like that. Good afternoon, everybody. I have the pleasure of introducing a great partnership that we have in the district that we've had for the last 3 years. Alongside of me, you will see Dr. Madsen from Texas A&M College Station, and now the new Dr. Elizabeth Luevano. She just received her PhD from Texas A&M, and they're here with me to present on the Kellogg Inclusion Research Project and Grant. So this partnership was brought to us by Texas A&M, and it establishes a funding source for our campuses that go along the Southwest Legacy feeder pattern, which is Southwest Legacy, Resnick, McAuliffe, and the elementaries that feed into them, to provide training, professional development, consultants, and opportunities for parents to do a different type of parental engagement or parental learning. So I'm going to allow them to showcase that for you. What I will let you know is in the course of 3 years, our campuses will receive in total over $250,000 in just direct funds. We receive countless hundreds of $1,000s in PD, professional learning, consulting, and just training that we get monthly. We have 65 parents, teachers, and administrators that come every month to receive monthly training on a new pedagogy, a new activity, a new program, and how to implement it in their system. I'm going to let them talk about it, and then I'm going to give you some highlights from the program. Dr. Madsen.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us, Dr. Stuft and the board. We'll talk, I came to you, I think Dr. Torres and I came with you to talk about, would you be interested in participating in a survey that we would develop that would look at schools and their engagement and look at how inclusive they are. And I think we had somebody said, is that Kellogg's the cereal? And yes, it is. And so we continue to promote Kellogg. And then the other part, somebody said, is it for special ed? Well, no, we take the definition of inclusion broader. So special ed kids are in part of the things that we're doing, but it's broader and including all the students. And so it's more or less looking at, I think that the best word here I heard this afternoon was going to be closing the gap, or schools with changing demographics. So you provided us the go-ahead to do that. We got information from that, which we then developed sort of some areas that we thought we would work with. So we went back to Kellogg, and they loved the survey. They were very intrigued with your district, and they said, could you develop a school improvement model? And we said, yeah. So at a $1.5 million they provided us, and we work with these 8 schools that are in this feeder pattern, and we've been working with them now. This is now the 2nd year, and we'll be starting the 3rd year this summer. When we worked with Kellogg's, they said, we're going to give you the funding, but it's not one of these things where you go get the survey and leave. You're going to have to be authentically engaged and be a part of that. Well, that's kind of what A&M does, so we were very pleased that they were on the same page as we were. So we approached the district, we identified the feeder patterns, and we started off with where would be an area we thought would be most important. So the first piece of that was looking at particularly data engagement and how to look at that data and what that means. So we spent some time working with districts to see that when you have kids that are suspended, it has an impact on your achievement. And so these are the things that we're creating, this awareness that we're asking teachers and administrators to think about. Another piece of that was looking at parent engagement. In the old days, and I'm part of that old day part, we used to call it parent involvement. Now with the new ESSA rules, we're moving it more to engaging families. And with that, it doesn't just mean the school is there and parents come, but it means that schools now have to do outreach and engaging families. So we've been working the last 2 years on what is parent engagement, and we've really had to have ourselves to rethink what that engagement is. And Francis will talk about those projects, but we've had really good experience. And then this past year, we spent a lot of time with college and career readiness. How do we prepare students for college or post-secondary education? But what we found in that discussion is, okay, we present this information, but elementary schools say, well, yeah, but I'm not sure about this. So what we're really trying to look into is those transitions. How do we smooth that transitions out from the elementary to the middle to the high school? Because we know when they get to high school, that's where they're more apt to drop out. We know in the middle schools that they're often confused about what it is they want to be when they grow up. And in the elementary, parents need to think at that point, so we're educating parents. So this is over the next 2 years. We'll end the project as of this summer on into December, and then we'll come back with the evaluations and the results. But early results, we're beginning to see some very positive aspects with our principals. We've been meeting with them. But one of the key things that we really missed out, and I think that's what Dr. Levinos did on her study with student voice. We heard from the parents, we heard from teachers, we heard from the school administrators, and so the missing voice right now, we're beginning to see a lot of research out there on this piece that's not there. So we had, as part of her research, she went off and conducted a study with the students and then came back and did some qualitative work. But I thought her insights have been shared with these schools and the interest that schools have taken in terms of what she found out. So I would like her to talk about that.
Thank you. We wanted to also highlight just the authentic partnerships and relationships we have with your 8 schools, your leadership teams there, the teachers that we meet with on a monthly basis. Every time we meet with them, it's no longer just a meeting, we're coming here to give you information, but it really is an authentic relationship that we've developed where it's like family coming together. We really do. We engage each other on hugs. We engage on these conversations of how we can impact student learning, impact our communities, impact our individuals that are coming into our school campus, and then pushing the envelope of that. And then one came about was our student voice research that we've done, and just the true narrative that comes out from that, and what positive changes we can make, not only at the secondary level, but also at the elementary and also at the middle schools. And it really is direct consumers of our direct services. We need to impact, we need to gauge that information. And it really has been the true nature and the true character of your leadership teams. When we come and present this information to them, they know that we're coming from a place of let's really partner together and really engage our students so that they can have the most positive educational experience that they have here that will impact the rest of their lives. And so when we come to them, we let them know that that some of our students don't know how to fill out a FAFSA. They really don't know where they're going to go after they graduate. And when we come together and we meet, we look at this, and we come from the minute they come into kindergarten, that journey starts. And when they transition from your elementary to the middle to the high school, they are no longer your students. You have impacted them and their educational journey. So let's start that conversation here. One thing that we're going to focus on next year is our literacy component. And we're going to develop with your leadership teams a comprehensive literacy program and plan that will literally impact your students' learning from the minute that they step into elementary and then on to the time that they're graduate, and really focusing on these soft skills. So all of the student research that we have gathered, we brought that into the conversations with their elementary schools with, are we developing our 21st century leaders? Are we developing those soft skills that they need? Are we changing the vocabulary and really highlighting and branding our services in a way that when our students are giving these Christmas programs, we're not just giving the performance. What are we doing? We're teaching them how to research a topic. We're teaching them how to do public engagement. We're teaching them how to do public speaking. Those are all the soft skills that they need. Let's brand it that way. And that's something that we are just so blessed that we have a wonderful partnership with you, and we're excited to see what the data will result in, and we're excited to see this next year as we bring in this literacy component. So we just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity.
Some of the highlights that we have are that every one of our campuses, through the Kellogg's funding and partnering with Title I, has had at least one night of a parent night that had over 100 parents. We've had some up into 400 people attending, which is a first time for some of these campuses. They've done things out of the box thinking. For example, instead of having just an orientation night where parents come and sign a parent-school compact at the campus, they've rented out Traders Village because the parents said, well, what do I do with my kids while I'm sitting there meeting with the teachers? Well, they gave them the bracelets, the kids rode rides, they fed the kids there, and they met with parents on increments of time. So it's about getting out into the neighborhood and making it meet the needs of our parents instead of making it easier just on the campus. So these are some of the things that they've done. I would say that every one of the campuses that we've met in the last 2 days has valued the relationship that they've had and the learning experience they've had with this program. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to commend Frances up and to her group. Like, pretty phenomenal folks. It is Texas A&M. We really don't need to say anymore. But they have really become family as well. And, you know, Frances has a way of making things happen. This actually started with 4 of our campuses, and over the next few years, we're able to double that, which is a real qualifying and makes Peter better. So it's a huge benefit to our parents. Thank y'all so much for being here.
All right, next thing on the agenda is academic waiver.
Yes, we have Coach Wagner, and we had to do some UIL updates and eligibility, so he's here to just share some of those updates and changes that we have to share.
So earlier this fall, it came to our attention that we didn't have any. We've been operating on an administrative procedure of if a student that's in an academic, advanced academic course, such as dual credit, honors, AP, whatever the case may be, in order to be eligible, as the UIL allows us to do, they had to get a 64 or higher if they were to be granted, be able to get a waiver. As that came up, we realized that this administrative procedure was never written down or anything, and this has been something that's been going on for, I don't know, somewhere in the range of before I got here for sure, and longer before that. So it really gave us an opportunity to talk to our principals and take into account what we believe what is the best thing for our kids at this point, and really re-examine those things and put those into practice, or not put them into practice, but to recommend them and see where we go from there. And so the recommendation that came out of that was that we give if a student. So let me back up just a minute. The UIL allows us, basically, the curriculum instruction department brings a list of courses to the board that have to be approved so that they're eligible not to be used in no pass, no play. Okay. When we do that, then basically if you're taking dual credit English and you fail it with a 10, according to the UIL, you're still eligible. Doesn't matter what it is. But it also gives the district the opportunity to put more stringent parameters around those courses. And so we're choosing to do that because we think that if you're going to add higher rigor, they should be held accountable to some degree. And so we talked to our principals about that, and as a group, the recommendation that came out of that committee was that a student taking dual credit, AP, any type of advanced academic course at the high school level, they would have to get a 60 to be eligible for a waiver. We would give them the first 6 weeks, or if we're at a 6 weeks, or the first 9 weeks at the high school, you have to report your first grade reporting for eligibilities at the 6 weeks. If you're on a 9 weeks, then it goes to the 9 weeks as well. So that first 6 weeks, we kind of we're going to give them a pass, not necessarily a pass, but it gives us a chance for that kid that's in dual credit that's struggling to be able to say, oh my, I need to get out so that I can do this, or gives our teachers a chance to give more help so that we can get them going in the right direction. It's very kid oriented in that regard. And then the next 6 weeks, or at the 9 weeks when we report for report cards right now, then that's when that waiver process will happen, that they have to get a 60 to do that, and then then for those classes they can get a waiver for that. That waiver has to be signed to hold them accountable. They got to get a 60, then they have to have the teacher sign it. Their parent has to sign it, the kid has to sign it, and the kid also has to write a narrative as to why they need it and what they're going to do to improve to make sure that they don't need it next time. And so they can do that up to 3. Obviously, if they're struggling that much, we're probably going to do something to make sure that they're not struggling anymore before we get into that predicament again. That is the administrative procedure that we're recommending from there.
What would happen the second time?
So basically, each 9 weeks or each 6 weeks, if you fail again and you get a 60, then you're eligible for that waiver. The waiver goes through that whole process, goes to the principal, and the principal either denies it or approves it.
In other words, if I make 2 60s, I'm still playing if everybody likes it.
If you're taking advanced honors courses, the answer to that, I won't be thinking
And I should note at the middle school also, they haven't had this before, but at the middle school we talked to our middle school principals. It's going to the middle school, but not for honors courses. The principals decided that curriculum was pretty much in line with the regular one, and so. But since we moved algebra down, they saw a lot of 8th graders struggling that first 6 weeks in algebra. So what they said was we kept it in line with the high school. If you're taking a course in middle school that's getting high school credit, then that's where that'll happen. So Spanish 1, Spanish 2, and algebra right now is what you're looking at middle school.
Peter, what happens if the failure is in the same subject area? Doesn't matter what.
No, and so we base it off of talking to a lot of other districts, and basically the idea is if you're failing dual credit English 2 or 3 times, then there's probably something else that needs to be done, and so we didn't think that would be quite the issue. If you're in athletics or fine arts where this is really the biggest thing, then you have about 4 or 5 people who are checking these grades and that are probably trying to get you the interventions you need to figure out what's best for that kid. You're not going to get credit. You're right. Mm-hmm. Right. And that came up in our committee, and it also came up at senior staff when we were talking about it. And the idea was basically that we need to make sure we get that kid out, or make sure we've studied that situation to make sure that doesn't happen.
Maybe they come up with a counselor or the instructor or something.
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe do something for that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Side by side, we're basically moving from 64 to 60. Correct? They can-
Yes, sir.
Anything if they have a 60 or higher to 70, they can do the waiver. We're putting a cap at 3 per grading period.
Mhm.
We've done our research with surrounding ISDs, and we found out there's a variety of different ways everyone does it. Ours aligns with our friends to the north,
Mhm.
most like them, and if we just applied the policy, there wouldn't be a limit of 3, there wouldn't be 60, there would be anything. So we're really trying to bring some structure around the policy through our admin regulations, and that's what Peter here is doing.
Yes, sir.
This is an item of information, because we do already have a policy. We just want to make sure that you guys are okay with this is how we're choosing to apply this right now by putting additional structure around it. And even relieving some of the 64, we couldn't figure out how we came up with 64, other than we try to use the weighting formula for additional grades.
And the nice thing is that this is unilateral, so it's across both high schools. It's the same exact waiver. All the principals know this is the way it is, and so I think Dalila is bringing the CNI will bring you the courses here soon as to which ones we're going to use, and there's actually a pattern that's been brought up to that. So, because there's certain ones that we offer, because we offer so much dual credit, that there's certain ones by the UIL standards that are actually right now not covered under that no pass, no play and everything. So as they're going to do that soon, so we can start applying this administrative procedure as soon as possible for our kids. Mhm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The next thing on the agenda is the high school master schedule.
Yes, we want to give a update. I know that the master schedule is definitely always a sensitive area, and we're trying to
Really
do
not our
our,
business.
sorry?
The master schedule for high school is not our business.
No, but you guys will get the first phone call if we're going to change it. So, we're not coming we're coming to get the word. So when you do get a phone call, you do have some information available to you. You know, we talked about the market group, the district we're comparing ourselves to. One of the visits we went on with Eagle Pass this past. We've been there a couple of times trying to learn from our neighbors from the south. They do a 5-period day. We're trying to stick with a 5-period day. At the same time, we're trying to stop the home from losing PPE funding. So we're trying to be a little more responsible in making sure that we take advantage of our revenue streams at the same time offering our kids opportunities to learn. So, Lee Paragon, who's our executive director for secondary education, is going to give us a status update. We're not done. We're going to continue to work and get more information from teachers and students so that when we start the year, everyone's on the same page and you guys won't get 100 phone calls.
So this reflects feedback, or this is what we're looking at for next year, or this is the preliminary work to know what we want to do next year?
Remember, we had to come in and mandate it this year, so we used the CPE funding. We're trying to put in some of the fix.
Correct.
This fixes the CPE problem.
And also it prepares us to be ready to give the students and the teachers schedules way earlier. Instead of, school's about to start and teachers don't know where they're gonna be, kids don't know where they're gonna be. So when do we think, if we do this work, then they'll have the information by when?
Right, so right now we have different factors that we're working with, but I know Ms. Aragon has worked on a timeline. So right now we're right within our timeline, which is going around and getting enough feedback. So I think we can have a really good proposed master fail schedule, that's what it is right now. And then we do have the new data system, which is Teams for Logic. So along with these two systems, which is a Teams for Logic, we're learning that system, we're going to be doing the course request and all that background work in order for us to be able to get the students their course requests and all of that preliminary work done. And I think we're shooting for March for us to go ahead and get our base work completed. And then because of Teams for Logic, we might be a little delayed in actuality giving them their actual schedule to the students.
Okay.
But the courses that they're going to request, that work, we're looking at March. By March, all of that work, the students will be able to choose the courses by then.
But they might get their schedules potentially before school ends, before May, or are you looking at the summer?
That would be the first time that ever happened.
I know, that's what I'm saying, I'm gonna be super excited, because the kids are waiting into, August sometimes.
It's more just a sample of what they requested, so if going home, I know that these are the courses I've requested. We may have some change because of EOC, if students pass EOC in the summer.
Right.
There may be some schedule changes, summer school also will affect that. So we want them to know these are the courses they request, and if there are any errors, and they can correct at that point, and then counselors can work on it during the summer.
Right, but it should affect the mass number of
Yes.
students that are not those special cases, should be able to, think, okay, this is what I've got coming for next year by the end of this school year.
Yes, it may not have periods, but it will have the courses that they
Sure.
requested. And then also teachers will have an idea of what their schedule will look like before they leave. So planning, PD can also be done in the summer.
Perfect. That's a big goal.
We wanted to just focus, give you an update on sample schedules, because that's what the high schools are currently working on. We called different districts to see 90-minute periods of 5 accelerated blocks. Who was running this type of schedule? Los Fresnos was the only district that mirrored one 50-minute and then the rest 4 90-minute blocks. We really looked, the closest we could find were, was a district running 80 minutes, but again, that does not work with our CTE courses that need the contact hours. So we looked at this as a model, we shared with the campuses. Our master schedule committee consists of different members from central office, we have transportation, we have athletics, we have the campus level, because we really want to ensure if we are going to be looking at a sample schedule for next year, can transportation fulfill our needs in terms of getting students where they need to go. We know some students are getting bused from campus to campus. Los Fresnos is a 9, 10, 11, 12. They have two different campuses at the high school. So just give you an example of what we were looking at when we were researching for a schedule to share with the high schools. We wanted to show you a sample. Currently, what is happening is Southwest High School and also Legacy High School created a survey and is asking staff for their input. If we are going to be looking at a schedule for next year, would you like the schedule? Yes or no. So both campuses, because we know Legacy High School cannot run 2 lunches right now, they have to be on 3. They have to have 3 lunches. Their schedule looks slightly different, just with 1 with 2 lunches and then the other one with 3. But we really wanted to hold true to the 50 minutes being at lunch, because the students are being bussed around. We don't want them to have one high school to run a 50-minute period, first period, and then come to Legacy 4th period, and then have to do another 50-minute class. So we want to make sure that both high schools are running the 50-minute periods at both times to allow for students who are being transported to have the same schedule. So this is what a sample schedule will look like for Southwest High School next year. And then also for Legacy with a split with the 3 lunches.
And so currently what we're doing is we're running 2 75-minute periods and also 2 90-minute periods, 3 90-minute periods, and this one would give us those 4 90-minute periods in order for us to be able to get funding for the CTE courses. And give us more flexibility to place those CTE courses in those areas. And so even within the 50-minute course, we can still run a CTE course that requires 45 minutes. And so now knowing right now, based on the staff feedback and recommendations, we will be able to schedule the courses and place them actually where they need to be in order for us to get the active funding when it comes to CTE as well.
So those 50 minutes you're talking about is the lunches?
That would be where we will be placing the lunches around those nights.
How much do they have right now?
Right now, well, the lunchtime would be still a 30-minute. I think that's what they have at the high schools currently.
They're 30-minute lunches, and then the class in this scenario would be 50 minutes. So 30 minutes for lunch, 50 minutes for class.
The 50-minute classes are for like core classes? Is that?
We would place, if it's going to be a core class, then it would be like a full-year class.
Yes.
And so we're even having that discussion along with what Coach Wagner shared earlier. We want to be able to have like our AP courses or dual credit courses, go back and just review how those courses, which are 90-minute courses or 45-minute courses or full-year courses or half-of-the-year courses.
Yeah.
It's still going to have a lot of
Figure it out.
discussion on that.
Right, okay.
Now, does Legacy have the 3 lunches due to cap, or?
Due to the size of the cafeteria.
But-
It's too small, or what?
Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
they haven't been able,
Well,
you wanna?
Well, it's actually, I mean, if you look in relative size to what Southwest High School has, they have a mall, so that's where most of the kids feed. And so there's a capacity issue with the size of the cafeteria at Legacy. It can hold, I would say, 750 students.
Yeah.
And so if you have a school of 2,000, that's more capacity than you have for just 2 lunches.
So we were expecting that when we built it?
Yes. And that's,
I guess I missed that.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I think we built it for the cafeteria to hold about 700 to 800. And we built other learning areas, so they have these kind of outdoors, amphitheater type learning areas that were always part of the plans. And so we knew this going in, and we've done 3 lunches at Southwest High School forever. And so we think it's not ideal, but it always works. And I would think if you do a survey amongst Lawrence High School, 2,000 are all going to have 3 lunches.
Well, at least they have enough time.
Correct.
Before it was 30 minutes over here or something. 40 minutes.
We had some that had more than 3 at one time, didn't we?
At 4 at one time.
When we maxed.
Yeah, that's like
The attitude. Great attitude.
She speaks for herself.
So our next steps as campuses right now are going to be reporting the results of the survey to senior staff on Thursday. And then also, we don't want to forget about student voice, so we are going to ask campuses, we're giving them a timeline until January, because we know that right now there are a lot of events post the semester that are happening, so we really want to give students time to look at the sample bell schedules, current 11th graders, and then also vote on if they like the sample bell schedule, or if they would like something different.
Very good.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's definitely going to be different. One of the options is go back to the 7th grade period day and just double block CTE courses. But we didn't think that was a really good option. It's not what we go out and visit. Like Eagle Pass, academically, they're doing a really phenomenal job. And I think you see that in a smaller towns or like this support of education, with education being the equalizer, and, you know, so everyone supports. I think you lose that when you get to the metropolitan area, pretty much about the pace of the day is a lot faster, it's a lot different. And so there's some benefit by being a small town out in South Texas, in my opinion. That's not research, but I think we can capture with our schedule, we can capture additional opportunities and still get our CTE funding and do all the things we're trying to do. So I think what we hear from our kids is they like the 5th grade thing. They don't get away from it. They didn't like it in the beginning, but I think they like it now. And so we're going to go out and gather that information, bring it back, so we share it with you guys as well too.
Plus, Dr. Merstuff, I do want to express that I think it's important that when we make this big, massive change last year, and of course we had some hiccups that's to be expected, and we have to tweak it and give it a little bit of time to settle in. I think it would be a mistake for us to give up and go back in a 1-year window. It's just, I think it's a good idea to give it a little bit of time to work itself out, and I think you guys are making great strides at accomplishing that. So kudos.
It looks like we're going to come back and recommend a minimal change to the start of date for, I don't know,
High school.
we'll cover this. High school, we may ask to start 10 minutes earlier. That may be the only change we have to make. We'd like to close it.
We're gonna have, go ahead.
We'd like to close it.
We'll close this meeting and then go on this one second for a few minutes. All right, we're adjourned at 1 o'clock. All right, we're back in regular session and it's 1:20. Sir, do you have any words of wisdom?
Well, I have information, I wouldn't call it words of wisdom. But for your information, I know that you guys had some questions the last time that Ms. Bolte presented some information, and specifically in reference to root causes of some of the things that she's working on. And we're not going to discuss it, but I would like her to tell you what's in your blue folder so you can take it home and study, and we'll put it on a future agenda.
Okay.
Give you some time to
You gonna give us a test?
No, I'm gonna give you this.
Also, can I, the PowerPoint that, what is it, Mo Casey, can we, can you send that to us?
We have access to one?
Yeah, we'll ask them for it.
Just through email is good, because she skipped a bunch of slides.
We'll ask you for that.
They're really smart people. I had the opportunity to, she did something with curriculum at the subcommittee at one of the meetings, and they're very good at explaining really complicated stuff. For us to be able to understand this new system that is just so ridiculous.
And I think they work with large systems. I think we're the smallest system that we have a really great relationship, so they really love coming.
Well, I like that they also inform us about, like, okay, so this is what the state is saying, but here's the reality, as far as we as consultants can tell, right? To me, that's really, really important, because, you know, if you don't, you're just hearing what the state's telling you, and you think, oh, you know, we're, shame on us, and it's not. Right? The system's skewed, and it's good to know what we're up against so that we can strategize to overcome some of the barriers that our kids face every day. Thank you.
So in your folder, there's a synopsis of some of the work that we did to come up with the root causes. I've given you a copy of, a hard copy of the tip plan
Thank
for
you.
each campus. And behind it is their actual work
for each root cause to see how they drilled down to get to the actual root cause. And there's two packets, one for legacy and one
Thank
for.
you, we
yeah.
appreciate that. We'll look those over.
Thank you, ma'am.
And then I believe that your place, there are a number of different activities
Oh, yeah.
that if you're looking to attend, any evening where you can keep you busy.
Whoa, that's a lot of events.
Mr. Fraser will be going to all of them.
Absolutely. That's correct. And December, is it day after tomorrow, Brandon, Christmas party here?
Yes, 11:30 on Thursday.
11:30 to 11 p.m. Is the district Christmas party here. Across the street is the annex.
Admin,
And the
Jim.
host is business and finance this year.
I have a question. At the Sioux Lights performance, what time is that gonna be at, and who is gonna perform? Is it?
Yes, ma'am, at 6:45, it's gonna be, it's gonna go to about 6:45 to 8 o'clock, and it's various groups. It is Resnick, McAuliffe, and Legacy that are included, and some of them are band, some are choir. There's a variety of different performances.
Okay, thank you.
At the zoo, which is really nice. I hear.
Yeah. There's a charge there though, right? Like.
Yes, ma'am.
You know what it is? Is it
I know that we were able to secure $5 tickets for the kids, but I think to the general public, I think it's more than that. I think it's probably closer to 18 or something like that.
We took the grandbabies 2 weeks ago at night.
I thought I had read that
If
something.
you haven't
about-
seen it, zoo at night, Christmas night, they call it Christmas lights at the zoo or whatever.
Anything else? Anybody?